Hello everyone. I want to begin by saying that I am not one of those people who buys into the idea that social media is not connected to real life, and that online politics doesn't have any real impact politically. It clearly does, and if online activism has failed to yield any measurable victories for the left so far, that should, in my opinion, be attributed more to the failure of leftists to properly make use of it than to the impossibility of doing so. That being said, in this video, I want to talk about a very serious barrier within leftist politics online to making productive use of social media for a collective benefit. But before we get into it, I'd like to take a moment to mention ground news. Fuck ground news. It's possible, if you're watching this, that you, like myself, have watched with dismay as very large, ostensibly leftist influencers like Natalie Wynn, aka ContraPoints, and Abigail Thorne, aka PhilosophyTube, have seemingly gone out of their way to make soft appeals to Zionists in recent posts and videos, trying to frame themselves as one of the good ones to people who spend their time cheerleading the racism-fueled massacre of tens of thousands and the displacement of millions of people from their homes. Spouting nonsense like, the online left's obsession with Palestine saved no lives, didn't prevent a single bullet or bomb, and it may have slightly contributed to the re-election of Trump. Yes, that's it, Natalie. Israel is breaking international law and committing probably the great humanitarian crime of our generation. But what about leftists on the internet? If you can't read between the lines, what about Natalie's career? Not that we needed any additional reasons to not take ContraPoints seriously again, but here you go. Now, if you believe these people to be progressive and leftist advocates for the oppressed up until this point, well then I've got a bridge to sell you, but also you're probably very understandably disturbed by these developments. Why would a leftist trans advocate like ContraPoints jump on the bandwagon of concern-trolling pro-Palestinian advocates amidst 100,000 people, give or take, being murdered by a fascist state about raising awareness of the horror, and then go on to pretend like the cause of Trump's re-election, to the extent it was affected by the Gaza issue at all, was the fault of progressives actually standing up for progressive values, and not Genocide Joe and the Democratic Party for being only slightly inferior supporters than the Republicans of Netanyahu's desperate attempt to undermine his own country's democracy by using a constant flow of states of emergency at the expense of hundreds of thousands of people's lives to prevent himself from being voted out of office. Well, it's for the same reason ContraPoint spent the one video she made in 2022 calling leftists jealous for complaining about the rich endangering the public by flouting public health regulations that were enforced upon everyone else.
What people were upset about was not that she had the party. I mean, wouldn't you escape to a private island if you got that MILF money? The problem was more that she tweeted about it. When Kim tweeted this, most people were trapped in quarantine. We didn't get to have birthday parties. Some people couldn't even travel to visit their dying relative. Pain at the good fortune of others is how Aristotle defined envy. And I think it's interesting that whenever social media erupts in outrage over luxury music festivals or Kim K's birthday party, no one ever uses the word envy. It's like we're averting our eyes, avoiding confrontation with this dark aspect of our own psychology.
And why in 2021 she was trying to separate herself from those nasty trans people on Twitter to be the good one, the good, reasonable, nice one to J.K. Rowling, even trying to get her on for a wine date.
So Joe, mother, I'm sorry about the Twitter mob. I know how much that sucks, so if you ever want to take me up on it, I'll buy you a drink to apologize for that.
And what did she do with the one video she put the laudanum down long enough to make in 2023? Defend Hillary Clinton and J.K. Rowling again as just victims of misogyny.
A movement can't get along without a devil, and across the whole political spectrum, there's a misogynistic tendency to choose a female devil, whether it's Anita Bryant, Hillary Clinton, Marie Antoinette, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or J.K. Rowling.
Natalie doesn't care about trans people more than getting rich and famous friends, because ContraPoints isn't a leftist. Leftism was just a way for her to get rich and famous. And now that she is rich and famous, ContraPoints doesn't need you anymore. What Natalie really cares about is getting the Kim Kardashian private island experience for herself. And those pesky leftists are getting in the way of that. Leftists need to start thinking about the use and exchangeability of social capital, because it's very important. Fame isn't just desirable in itself, it's a valuable resource that can be traded on. A famous leftist isn't just a leftist with a lot of attention, it's someone who can use that attention as a megaphone to make powerful signals in public. And if they and powerful right-wing movements can find mutual benefit in them altering what their signals say, they can be persuaded to do so. Leftists are often made fun of in the media for being too demanding of their public representatives. Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks goes on the warpath against trans women and homeless people, then goes on to right-wing shitposter channels like Sitch and Adam to complain about the left being too obsessed with purity. Brianna Wu decides that trans advocacy isn't a shortcut to fame and influence anymore, so she flips from morally condemning streamers for playing Hogwarts Legacy to publicly advocating against other trans people while butting up to the kinds of fascists that make Nick Fuentes benign by comparison. Someone like John Fetterman builds a successful political career advocating for progressive values, and then accuses progressives of being too obsessed with ideological purity when they complain about him voting against a ceasefire in Gaza, making him directly culpable for every murdered civilian, journalist, and aid worker that resulted. We could also talk about public figures like Vosh, who built himself up as an anarcho-syndicalist who supported Antifa, now acts as a Democrat Party shill, and was silent about Brianna Wu openly harassing trans members of his community, while he and his mod staff censored criticisms of her so long as she promised to get him interviews with Dem Party members like Ro Khanna, effectively helping Brianna to set herself up to profit as one of the most ghoulish apologists for the Gaza genocide on the internet. He also hoards images of children on his work computer.
See, this is an example of the kind of structure that I'm referring to.
Or consider Keffels, now largely forgotten. She used her status as a trans advocate to fleece her audience of largely low-income trans people for over $100,000, ostensibly to replace equipment that was confiscated during a swatting incident, and to pursue legal action against the police and Kiwi Farms where she claimed the swatter came from. In the end, it turned out that her equipment had actually been given back to her immediately, no legal case was being pursued, and that she had squandered all of the money on drugs and other personal pleasures. Or consider Destiny, who had originally built up his career as an anti-racist who gained fame for exposing JonTron as a white nationalist. Later, when he wanted to network with white nationalists like Nick Fuentes and Lauren Southern, he purged progressives from his audience, as well as Jews who were uncomfortable with Destiny connecting his audience with that of a virulent anti-Semite, and it was later revealed that he was secretly having an affair with Lauren Southern, and then subsequently he was in legal hot water over sharing intimate videos of vulnerable women he had on stream, as well as doxing and threatening people who criticized him for this. We could talk about others, Ethan Klein, Dave Rubin, Cenk Uygur, we could do this all day. The problem is that every single case like this is actually an example of an opportunistic snake using progressivism to build successful public careers and then, once they hit a critical mass of publicity, doing a public about-face to sell themselves as one of the good ones to the enemies of progressivism, who of course welcome the opportunity to deal a devastating moral blow to progressives and their public representation. So the problem with the left isn't purity testing. It's actually the opposite. The problem with the left is that our standards are so low that we will accept virtually anyone with a big audience and good screen presence to be our representatives in public, almost invariably resulting in them betraying us and serving a political victory to the right wing, as well as the cowardly liberal tagnuts who trail behind it. The pattern is clear. These are all examples of people who have used progressivism to build a large support base which catapulted them into public awareness, at which point they were able to trade on their exposure to change their politics and swap out their previous support base for a larger one. My fellow leftists, the problem with the left isn't purity testing. It's that we're not testing for impurities at all until there's literally tar pouring out of our faucets. On top of all of this, there are predatory practices. For example, several prominent leftists have tried to frame their platforms as politically important in order to solicit donations from people who are afraid of the rise of fascism globally. Let's take Michael Burns, who hides his earnings on Patreon from his viewers, who released a video in May guilting his audience into financially supporting him by insinuating that the reason why Donald Trump and fascists are so successful right now compared to the left is that the left doesn't donate enough to support progressive content creators.
I've already mentioned the financial advantage that the right wing has in today's content marketplace. And while a lot of leftists, self-included, really hate talking about money, I want to be as upfront and transparent as possible about the financial realities that I am facing by starting this channel. You've likely noticed a wave of videos and community posts from some of your favorite left-leaning content creators saying things like, "Oh my God, I don't have money anymore. I can't make money doing this. Please help me so that I can feed my cats." Views are down across the board, and YouTube ad revenue is way less than you probably think it is. Sponsors are tightening up their budgets, and a bad economy makes it harder for folks to support their favorite creators and channels.
This is not only misinformation. Content creators are not the movers and shakers in global politics. At over 1,200 patrons paying a minimum of $5 per month, Michael Burns was already more than well enough funded to produce the 2 low-effort video essays he publishes per month, of which one of them, last month, was the video pleading for money. This is also despicable. By convincing his audience that paying him is in their own political interest, he encourages vulnerable and frightened viewers who otherwise might not donate because they can't afford to, and who probably earn significantly less than him, to part with their hard-earned money, under the illusion that this is in their own interest. This is predatory. But okay, let's leave that aside. Is Michael at least delivering on the content his audience is paying him to produce? Well, in the past month and a half, roughly, Michael has published about 71 minutes of content spread out over 3 videos. One of these is the aforementioned video in which he begged his audience for more money, and the latest, entitled "Conspiracy Theorists Are Right in the Wrong Way," was plagiarized. You heard me correctly. Plagiarized. Minus a few jokes and a sponsorship break, almost all of this video by Michael Burns is lifted directly from a Cleveland Review of Books article called "Feelings Over Facts, Conspiracy Theories, and the Internet Novel" by Celine Wen. For example, in Wen's article she writes, quote, "In Doppelganger, Klein suggests that liberals and leftists were too quick to dismiss right-wing conspiracy theorists. Take Naomi Wolf, a liberal feminist turned Stephen Bannon subordinate who is frequently mistaken for Klein. During the pandemic, Wolf was one of many COVID skeptics who raised the alarm about vaccine passports, claiming that vaccination records would be used for a social credit system that would lead to slavery forever. The theory, Klein notes, is inaccurate in its specifics and co-opts the language of structural racism in perverse ways. But it also reflects very real fears, which are substantiated by historical events and mirror leftist critiques of power. Before the CDC became every Democrat's favorite government agency, it was also the organization that helped oversee the Tuskegee study, which deceived hundreds of black men about their syphilis diagnoses and denied them necessary medical treatment for 4 decades. The right wing's paranoia about vaccine passports reflects anxieties about big tech and big government. Leftists familiar with surveillance capitalism and the CIA's history of domestic espionage share the same concerns. As Klein notes, conspiracy theorists get the facts wrong, but often get the feelings right. The feeling that every human misery is someone else's profit, the feeling of being exhausted by predation and extraction, the feeling that important truths are being hidden. The word for the system driving those feelings starts with C, but if no one ever taught you how capitalism works, then it's easy to see how you might confuse it with another C word: conspiracy." Unquote. Compare this with Michael's video.
Now, in her recent book, Doppelganger, Naomi Klein gets into this and writes that conspiracy theorists get the facts wrong, but often get the feelings right, meaning that they're right to feel like the world doesn't make sense. Like nefarious forces are making life increasingly hard for normal people. But they get the facts wrong when they rely on overly complex and conspiratorial narratives to make sense of things. She explores this in the book by contesting her own work, which is famously critical of neoliberalism and capitalism, with her doppelganger, Naomi Wolf, whose own political skepticism led her to go full-on conspiracy theorist in recent years. They're both Naomis using research and writing to try to make sense of the world, and while Klein locates the root problem in neoliberal capitalism, Wolf sees it in 5G, COVID vaccines.
As you can see, Michael has completely lifted Wen's arguments and references without giving any attribution, and crudely swapped their order in order to hide what he's done. Take another example. In Wen's article she writes, quote, What's the difference between conspiracy theory and critical theory? In both cases, wrote the French philosopher Bruno Latour, you have to learn to become suspicious of everything people say because they live in the thralls of a complete illusion. Then, after disbelief has struck and an explanation is requested for what is really going on, in both cases again it is the same appeal to powerful agents hidden in the dark, acting always consistently, continuously, relentlessly. Unquote. Now let's compare to Michael's video.
According to French philosopher and anthropologist Bruno Latour, conspiracy and critical theory actually have a lot in common. He writes that in both cases, you have to learn to become suspicious of everything people say because they live in the thralls of a complete illusion. Then, after disbelief is struck and an explanation is requested for what is really going on, in both cases, again, it is the same appeal to powerful agents hidden in the dark, acting always consistently, continuously, relentlessly.
We can see here that Michael has again directly lifted from Wen's article without acknowledging it, and the only reason why we caught it is because the original article actually misquotes Latour. It should actually read illusio here, not illusion. For a breakdown on why this misquote matters, because it actually really affects Latour's meaning here, check out this video by Brooks Brown at the Quarantine Collective on YouTube.
Here's how citations work.
Shut up, nerd. But back to it. What if we try to be a little bit charitable here? These are just two examples, and I'm sure I could find more if I dug. But perhaps Michael didn't mean to plagiarize Wen's article, and he just was lazy. Let's say he just asked ChatGPT to generate a script about conspiracy theories for him, and it just happened to mine Wen's article for information. This would still be scamming his audience, who are paying Michael to produce original philosophical content, but at least then we could believe that Michael didn't mean to steal someone else's work, right? Well, at 1646 and at 1804 in his video, Michael quotes from Alenka Zupanchik's A Short Essay on Conspiracy Theories. Let's take a listen.
According to philosopher Alenka Zupanchik, this critique doesn't hold, as it too quickly conflates what critical theory does with how conspiracy theory operates. Now, she writes that, however, while critical theory examines the means and ways in which, for instance, the manufacturing of consent takes place, a conspiracy theory immediately jumps to what is behind, to hidden depths, to another reality. It never really deals with critical analysis of facts and of reality in their inner structure. Zupanchik goes on to write that the basic assumption of any critical theory worthy of its name is that precisely as false, these facts are extremely relevant for the analysis and have to be taken and examined seriously. So even if the conspiracist gets caught up on a particular what, we can still ask why and take that why pretty seriously.
And at 2606, he quotes an article called Mirror Mirror by Nico Baumbach.
In an essay on Klein's book, Nico Baumbach writes that anti-establishment politics, without a critique of capitalism or some guiding egalitarian principle, accounts for the lure of Trumpism and conspiracism and will remain seductive as long as mainstream liberalism takes the side of the establishment in response and there is no readily available left alternative.
Now these two are interesting because while Baumbach's article is referenced in Wen's article, the quotes from Michael's video aren't. They are, however, linked in Wen's article. And the link to Zupanchik's article was paywalled, suggesting that not only did Michael Burns lift his content from Wen's article, whether or not with AI assistance, he also likely had to manually follow the links in Wen's article and copy from them in order to pass off Wen's references as his own. It seems that Michael has just gone into this person's article and plagiarized her research. But since Michael is apparently fine with scamming his audience with AI-generated scripts and outright plagiarism, let's have some fun and run Michael's script through Claude. Quote, the YouTube creator appears to be using Wen's review as a foundational text, both for direct quotes and as a roadmap for their own analysis. While they add their own examples and perspectives, the theoretical scaffolding is largely borrowed from Wen's piece. This represents extensive structural borrowing beyond mere citation. The YouTube creator has essentially adapted Wen's analytical framework while adding their own commentary and examples. There are several suspect patterns that suggest problematic appropriation. The most concerning pattern, uncredited structural wholesale adoption. The YouTube creator has essentially reverse engineered Wen's entire analytical architecture while presenting it as their own original thinking. They use the exact same theoretical progression, follow the same argumentative logic and sequencing, adopt the same key distinctions and frameworks, and present the same conclusions. But they only explicitly credit Wen twice with brief quotes, while the vast majority of the intellectual work derives from her piece. There are academic dishonesty patterns like the laundering technique. The creator cites the original sources, directly making it appear they did primary research when they're actually working through Wen's synthesis and interpretation of these sources. There is selective attribution. They credit Wen for 2 small quotes, but not for the overarching framework that structures their entire 30-plus minute video essay. There is false originality. Phrases like contemporary philosophy has a lot to say about this phenomenon, and presenting themselves as discovering these connections when they're following Wen's roadmap. There are ethical red flags like labor theft. Celine Wen did the scholarly work of synthesizing multiple complex theorists into a coherent argument. The YouTube creator benefits from this labor while minimizing attribution. There is audience deception. Viewers are led to believe they're getting original analysis rather than a video adaptation of an existing essay. This violates academic standards of attribution that should apply to educational content. By the by, did I neglect to mention that Michael Burns sells himself on his channel as a former philosophy professor? And Claude concludes, the pattern suggests the creator read Wen's piece, used it as their primary source and structural guide, then backtracked to cite the original theorists to disguise the extent of the borrowing. This is intellectually dishonest scholarship masquerading as original video essay work. Unquote. I for one welcome our new robot overlords. Abigail Thorne is another one who has also attempted to frame herself as struggling and low income.
This is the building where I was born. It used to be a hospital, but now it's luxury flats. Apartments in there go for about £600,000. Ironic that I can't afford to live in the room where my life began.
Meanwhile, like Michael Burns, Abigail also hides her Patreon income from her audience so that they don't see immediately that on Patreon alone, disregarding ad revenue from her videos, she makes more in 2 months than the average yearly income in her country. She also does no research when producing content, like Michael Burns. Her last 3 videos before her most recent one were excoriated by other philosophy influencers on YouTube for outright misrepresenting Friedrich Nietzsche as a racist and anti-Semite who claimed only certain ethnicities were biologically capable of doing philosophy, and her latest video was literally trying to explain away her poor research on those videos as being the fault of the limitations of the video format and capitalism.
I never considered that by adapting philosophical texts into videos, something might be getting lost in translation. Or something might be getting added in translation, namely me and my personality. But I look back at the history of the channel and that really tracks. The videos of mine that people cite as being the most impactful, the ones that people still share and talk about and remember, are the ones where I get really, really emotional. I mean, what is it that causes people to sign up for my Patreon or sign up to Nebula? The things that fund the show and keep it going. A parasocial relationship, an emotional connection. But that kind of video essay production, where you're constantly going over your own raw emotions and using them as content, is not emotionally sustainable. Believe me, I've seen other creators burn out and end up destroying themselves by doing that. There's a reason that not every episode of PhilosophyTube is about a topic that personally moves me to tears or that I'm massively invested in. Because if you want to make video essays as long as I have, you can't do that. You have to resist the demands of the audience and also of YouTube, the platform, to be constantly hacking off your own limbs and throwing them as fuel on the fire. I think we have found a fundamental limit to PhilosophyTube as a project.
Again, this is a person who, even without factoring in the ad revenue from her videos, is bringing in a full-time worker's annual income every 2 months to do nothing but make philosophy videos, while she's also been able to capitalize on her e-fame to get token gigs in big IPs like Game of Thrones and Star Wars. Additionally, Abigail has co-ownership with Nebula, a video hosting platform through which she additionally paywalls her content that she's already paid to produce, all the while describing her channel's mission as essentially one of charity. I'm giving away a philosophy degree for free is something she repeats regularly.
You might know that I started PhilosophyTube when the British government tripled the cost of attending university. I thought it was unfair that anyone had to pay to get educated, so I wanted to give away my philosophy degree for free online.
In recent months, this has reached a new level of obscenity as she's started to turn her main channel videos into de facto teaser trailers for paywalled content on Nebula.
So that's what we are going to talk about. Next time, was Nietzsche MAGA. You can see that video right now, ad-free and uncensored, by clicking the link in the description and going to Nebula. We emailed him and said, hey, do you want to be the voice of Thomas Jefferson on PhilosophyTube? And he said yes, right now on Nebula. That video wouldn't really work on this YouTube channel because I get Nebula.
Despite there already being an obscene amount of money to do nothing but research and make these videos. I'm giving away a philosophy degree for free, my ass. Abigail is being paid a ridiculous amount of money to make educational content, with the understanding that this is a charitable project that she needs that money to produce, and she can't be bothered to do the bare minimum. There's no excuse for this. Actual educators have to get by with vastly fewer resources than Abigail. This is not due to capitalism. This is Abigail's decision because she is selfish, dishonest, lazy, and greedy. For a detailed breakdown on just how poor Abigail's research is, see my tastefully thumbnailed video, PhilosophyTube is garbage, and here's why. Linked in the description. But to switch to a more serious point, Abigail has been a little worse than silent concerning Israel's massacre of Palestinian civilians. Now, she has publicly signed off on her supporters justifying that silence because it might endanger her acting career to speak up. Meanwhile, major figures in the industry are making bold statements concerning the genocide and condemning those who have made themselves complicit. In her most recent video, Abigail apparently was feeling the heat because she tried to both sides the genocide in Gaza.
I am aware that Israeli scholars have their responses, that the US and Israel are not the only countries to instantiate this pattern or something very close to it, and that a proper treatment of this subject would need to be done at length with due concern for the global rise in anti-Semitic hate crime that we've seen over the last few years.
You know, we can talk about the murder of tens of thousands of innocent children in Gaza, but we have to do so while keeping in mind the feelings of North Americans with a perpetual victim complex. When a user on Abigail's subreddit made a long essay post inquiring as to why Abigail can't even make a signal statement in any capacity condemning the genocide, Abigail locked the thread. When I consider this in the light of other Nebula users, like FD Signifier for instance, making soft attacks on progressives for being too loud and distracting while raising awareness about the mass murder of children.
And I just need people to have more self-control so that we don't have black liberals and Palestinians being the face of this conflict for a week. That is a tragedy.
When I consider this frankly disgusting behavior, claims that Nebula pressures associated creators to remain neutral on Palestine begin to make a lot of sense.
Most of you probably know I'd been working with another streaming platform for a number of years. In fact, I was one of the founding members. But after Israel's recent escalation of their genocide in Gaza, I was asked to either make a both sides statement or leave the platform. I wasn't willing to compromise my principles for business optics, so we parted ways as amicably as possible.
And with the immense amount of capital being purposed towards laundering Israel's reputation because of its actions in Gaza, the incentives are obvious. These people aren't concerned about maintaining faith with leftists and progressives. They want to keep doors open to mainstream celebrity and access to the immense amounts of capital that are currently flowing in their direction. Let me be clear about what I am saying. These leftist influencers are capitulating with the murderers of tens of thousands of children for the sake of their own upward mobility. Which raises an important question. Why do leftists let them do it? Why do the progressive audiences of ContraPoints and PhilosophyTube and etc. bend over backwards to defend these privileged, self-serving assholes while they throw the same marginalized people they built their platforms off of advocating for under the bus to protect their egos and to stuff their wallets? Why does this happen so often in the left? And I think I have an answer. It's because there is no such thing as the left. When we refer to the left, what we're actually referring to is whatever and whoever is currently standing counter to power. This position can be taken over by anyone. Everyone exists either in line with capital or against it, and people or movements who are once against capital can move in line with it, and sometimes vice versa. What makes us vulnerable to being taken advantage of by charlatans like the people we've been looking at in this video, what we are ultimately lacking in, is an affirmative leftist movement. Because right now, labels like leftist or progressive are just forms of branding people adopt when it suits their needs, and then slough off again whenever they get in line with capital. Every countercultural movement does this. That's why it works the way it does, and that's why we've been left behind. It's no different than saying we're pop rock versus hard rock. All of these people have moved so that their interests are wholly aligned with capital directly, and because of that, they are willing propagandists against those who challenge power, dubiously claiming that it is for the sake of organization and pragmatics that the truth must wait to be told. But as Felix Guattari wrote, the work of revolutionaries is not to carry words, to have things said, to transport or transmit models and pictures. Their work is to tell the truth where they are. No more and no less, without exaggeration and without tricks. How is this work of truth recognized? It's very simple. There is a way that works every time. Revolutionary truth is something that doesn't piss you off, something you want to be involved in, that takes away your fear, that gives you strength, that makes you ready to go full tilt no matter what, even if it kills you. The truth is not for theory and organization. Theory and organization only get involved after the truth appears. And I never thought I'd be saying this, but kudos to fucking Hassan Piker. He's more in line with capital than any of these frauds, and yet despite that, he's still saying the things that need to be said. Is he kind of dumb sometimes? Absolutely. But he's also doing the thing that needs to be done, even if it hurts his business, even if it offends his family. I really hate to say this, but Hassan is actually the model. He will speak truth to power, imperfectly, stupidly sometimes, but whether or not it aligns with his capital interests, and I have to respect that. And bluntly, name someone else in this space you can say that about. Hassan is doing the thing. That being said, in conclusion, we need to stop placing our hope in public figures and social influencers, in big individuals whose power and prestige ultimately reduced their privileged place with respect to capital. And when you pragmatically throw your support behind a public figure, pay close attention to their actions and who they break bread with. There's an old joke. If there's a Nazi at the table and 10 other people sitting there talking to him, you got a table with 11 Nazis. When you as a private person engage with someone like a friend or a family member with toxic political views, that is engaging another human being who has been formed by their environment to have toxic political views, and that is a part of changing hearts and minds to better ways of thinking. When this is done in public by figures with tremendous amounts of social and actual capital, that's not what's going on. What you are in fact witnessing is these people preparing an escape hatch in broad daylight to what appears to them to be more fertile fields for generating fame and profit. That's what we in the business call networking. And when so-called leftist influencers do it with fascists, or with people who are outwardly contrary to the values of the people they claim to represent, they are doing it in preparation to betray them. We need to be smarter, and we need to look out for each other. And a part of that is not letting ourselves get swept up into the cults of personality of people who fundamentally do not care about us. As always, thank you for listening, and take care.